Welcome to the Trueface Podcast. My name is Robby and I'll be your guide as we have conversations about what we can learn from what's going on in our lives. Most of us get stuck in our relationships with God and others, and we end up wondering, is this really all there is to it? Here's a question. What if God isn't who you think he is and neither are you? The grace-based relational discipleship resources at trueface.org help you answer that, to help you live into your true identity. That's why we invited Rebecca onto this podcast, because we're going to be talking about identity in a way that hopefully I pick up nuggets and apply them into my own life, because my conversation with Rebecca stirred some of this in me. So I was like, I want to ask some follow-up questions and might as well have you on the podcast to do that. I was on a podcast with Rebecca. You can check out her podcast, A Coffee, Conversation, and Coaching with Rebecca Anne. And for 15 years, she's been leading others and helping them develop through coaching and counseling, management and mentoring, and speaking. She holds a master's degree in human services and has been working as a full-time Christian speaker and life coach for over 5 years. She provides teaching and resources to help women specifically, but women and men, implement truth and grow in grace. Mm-hmm. And as I connected with her, it was pretty evident she got grace. She got this message of following Jesus through a lens of with trust, high trust relationships. And so I thought, I need to have her on the Trueface podcast, particularly to hear about her story and unpack a little bit about her journey and how she is progressed in these truths of grace around her identity. So, Rebecca, what I miss? Welcome to the Trueface Podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I could literally talk about grace all day.
Let's go. Well, maybe we can just turn it into like an 8-parter, knock out 8 podcasts, 8 hours in a row.
No,
Joe Rogan style.
Yeah.
I don't know if Joe would have you on his podcast. Probably not.
I would go if he asked me.
Heck yeah. Let's go. So you, it was really fun connecting, processing grace, identity stuff. But I left our brief conversation wanting to ask a lot of follow-up questions to unpack it further, because this identity thing, like how we see ourselves, is dynamic. And when I think about different groups of us, like there's different areas that are more difficult for us to really believe, really trust who we are by what God says about us. And I think of different groups like wealthy people, where we don't need God. And so our like the low grade voices of our validity, affirmation, security. I think about different groups. And your story made me think about, that's so fascinating. So for those of us who don't know, group. That's right, you are a different group. So yeah, I'd love for you just to share your story, because I'm curious to hear about your story and your journey around these things of identity.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yes. Again, my name is Rebecca. I grew up in a Christian, home. My dad's actually a pastor. I grew up in 90s kind of purity culture, and mom and dad who really loved each other. And so they got married young. I thought I would get married young. That's what I wanted. I guess you could say the identity that was given to me was, you're loved, you're accepted, but you're also meant to be a wife and a mother. Like that was just a given, right? And I wanted that. I thought I would get married in college. I thought I would have kids in my early 20s. Like that's just what good Christians do, or Christian women do. I had no other frame of reference for anything else. I have 2 older brothers. They got married when they were 19 and 20. So when I was 20, I was like I had no other plan for my life. I'll fast forward real quick so people know what ended up happening. I'm 40. I got married last year at 39. Which left almost 2 decades of like, what are you doing, Lord? And who am I? And why is everything going this way? And, that might not sound difficult to some people, or people who maybe didn't want to get married, or people who didn't feel like that was their kind of calling in life. But for me, it was identity shattering and almost faith shattering, because I was like, I don't understand why God is like ignoring me and helping everybody else move on with their life. So, I mean, that's the flyover of my life and my story. There's definitely moments along the way where I had to learn grace and learn my true identity, because I wasn't able to find it in, oh, I got married, I had kids, I'm a wife, I'm a mother. Like, those never came along for me.
I imagine those conversations changed in your young 20s to later 20s to early 30s. Walk through the progression of some of that faith potential shattering macro questions of God, are you ignoring me? How did that change over the 20-year period?
Oh gosh. I mean, I've got boxes of journals that answer that question. You want me to read
Pull them out, Rebecca. Pull them out. Pull out the journals.
I got the whole, no. Yeah, I mean, if I can remember back to my early 20s, it was really just me still kind of holding out for the dream, which was, God, if I just obey God, if I just like keep loving him and I don't sleep around or whatever. If I did love God. I was saved when I was pretty young. Like, I had a personal relationship with him, but I still kind of felt like, okay, it's going to happen a little later. The big crash for me happened when I was about 27, 28. And then it happened again when I was about 34, 35. But the initial one, yeah, I mean, I really, at that time in my life, I'd gone through a breakup. All of my friends were married already. 27 is an age when most people are getting married or are already married. And not just they'd been married for years. They were already having kids and stuff. And I just felt like everybody's life was moving on except mine. I particularly felt really kind of prideful and entitled about the fact that I was like waiting for marriage. And I was kind of told that if you do that, like, God will bless you. So that was wrapped up in there, that sort of like, I can earn it. And then I also had a friend right in that period of time who committed suicide. So there was like a lot of things that happened that summer when I was 27, 28. And it got me to the point where I was like, why am I following you? Like, you're not protecting me. This is painful. You're not giving me anything. It was very much, I didn't realize it. I didn't really deal with a lot of shame, but I was dealing with a lot of pride. Like, you owe me, God. I mean, I really, really felt like God owed me because I was being such a good little soldier. I was sacrificing where other people weren't. And I was watching other people who weren't obeying, who were getting blessings. And I'm like, what am I obeying? Like, why am I following you? And I went through a period of time where I was very hurt. I felt very hurt by God. I felt very ignored. I felt very left out. And I crashed. I stopped going to church. I stopped reading my Bible. I mean, I remember the Holy Spirit prompting me once to kind of read my Bible. And I was like, no, why? So I can open it and like read something that's going to give me hope that's not going to come true, because none of this is coming true for me. I can hear now how like entitled I was, but that's how I really felt at the time, And then there was a moment after about maybe 6 months of like, no church. I mean, probably what people would almost classify as like clinical depression, but that was really because I was tearing down my faith. I was like, I don't even know if I believe in God. Like, it was bad. But then there did come a moment when, I don't remember what day of the week it was, but there was one day when I guess you could say in the room of my heart, God had been like over here. I'd pushed him away, right? He was like over here in the corner and I was over here in the corner. My arms were crossed. My back was turned to him. I was like, you owe me an explanation. It's kind of how I felt. And I remember kind of turning around to look over my shoulder and see if he was still there, because I'd been awful. Almost, I denied him. I hadn't truly denied him, I guess, but I'd been awful to him in my heart. And I remember when I kind of turned around, he in my spirit said to me, I'm not mad at you. Like, I know how hard this is. And so first taste of grace, right? for a good little Christian girl. And then very shortly thereafter, in the next couple of weeks, it dawned on me that he didn't owe me anything, and
Yeah.
that the Christian walk is really, I remember him saying, Rebecca, I don't owe you marriage. I don't promise you marriage. Like, I have promised you me and all of me, and you have all of me. Like, you get all of me for the rest of your life. And that was that was one of the radical moments in my life where, like, he tore down that idol. I'll stop because that's a long story and you can ask questions if you want.
Well, I mean, thanks for sharing. I think of it's interesting how well you articulated that framework. Like, all of us function in relationships with expectations, spoken and unspoken rules.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it really boils down to what you just said. It feels like we either feel like we deserve something from God or we
Yeah,
don't deserve something from God.
right.
In moments of like optimism and like us doing more right behavior, therefore we should God, I
Yeah.
should, this blessing, weird
Mm-hmm,
theology,
mm-hmm.
or I don't deserve God. You are in the camp of I do deserve God. And some of
Yeah.
us who are, based on what we're struggling with drinking or struggling with sin, we don't deserve God's love. Both are rooted in the same thing, the deserve and the I don't deserve. It's like the same side of the coin.
Well, I still wanted his gifts. I mean, I wanted him to I thought he would give me something that would make me happier than him, because that it was a true idol. I was like, but love will make me happier, or having the title of wife, or having kids, or having a house, like all these other things that I was watching people kind of move on with their life. I'm like, these will make me happier than you will make me. And of course that's not true, but I mean, the identity part of it too, to kind of bring it back around to that, like, I grew up rather confident. Like, I did grow up in a loving home, so I wasn't struggling with kind of even self-worth issues when I was in high school and college. I wasn't, but
Yeah.
I started to eventually, because I'm like, why do I feel invisible? Why is nobody picking me? I mean, this is just kind of the girl heart perspective that you were asking about, but eventually it was like, I mean, year after year after year, Valentine's Day after Valentine, Christmas after Christmas, we're talking like 10, 15, 20 of these, that the Lord was like, is my love enough for you? Like, if I love you, does that make you worthy enough? Like, even if no man ever does, or whatever,
Yeah.
even if you don't fit into society's role. And man, there were some years where it didn't feel like enough, but he just kept poking at it until it did.
Yeah. What I that's one of those principles that's like so foundational to our core of, am I lovable?
Yeah.
What's my value? And we know the truths. You could have answered correctly at 20.
I could
Like,
have. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
but like, some years were harder than others. How did that,
Mm-hmm.
what was the difference at 37 versus
Mm,
27 in
mm.
like actually believing that his love was enough for your value?
I mean, it got hard again, to be honest. That story I told you about being 27, I think, is when he tore down the idol, and I learned grace in a new way. Like, you can't earn it, Rebecca. You don't have to earn it. I love you no
Yeah.
matter what. I don't owe you anything, but you get all of me. Like, everything that was wrapped up in what I learned at 27 was, I feel like that's when I learned grace.
Hmm.
Fast forward to about 35, 36. And I went through another breakup, and like, they got harder over time. They didn't get easier. And that one in particular, it was really, damn it, it was really hurtful. I don't remember why it was harder, to be honest, now than the other ones, but I do remember for the first time in my life, and I know some people live this way all the time, which breaks my heart for them, but it took me almost 15 years to feel this, but I do remember sitting in my car, kind of processing the breakup or crying about it or whatever. And for the first time in my life, I had a real dawning, which is the wrong word. It was probably more like an attack from Satan, that maybe I just wasn't lovable.
Mm.
right? So like the whole journey so far had just been, well, Rebecca, maybe it's just not God's plan. Maybe the guy God has for you just isn't here yet. Maybe you're just too tall. I'm 5'10". Maybe you're just too strong. Guys don't want a girl who's like a Christian speaker. Maybe you're just too, or not enough. And I could always kind of like find reasons to justify. But then all of a sudden there did come a moment, and it was later in my 30s, where it felt like there's something inherently wrong with me.
Mm.
And that one felt darker and scarier than all the others, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And God did pull me out of that. But again, I'll pause there to just say that one was like, I really have I get it now when people communicate that to me, and I feel it in my gut, because I'm like, that's a terrible way to feel. Like, to feel like there's something inherently unlovable, unworthy, different about you is just shockingly sad. And I remember feeling that way for a little while till God pulled me out of it.
There's not much more fundamental longings or questions or design than design for relationships with that question of experiencing longing love. And if that's questioned of our inherent value and whether we are loved, yeah, that's interesting, the progression of difficulty, because 27, it's the low, the little g God, the idol of marriage and husband. It's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I can mature
Mm-hmm.
through that.
Mm-hmm.
But that foundation, what did that process of healing and wrestling with that look like? Like how much? I'm assuming that's not like a good quiet time away from being resolved. Like that's a depth of process that, yeah. Walk us through what that looked like in your late 30s.
Gosh, it was another season of me feeling mad at God and distant from God. It was a different reason this time, but it was another about 4 to 6 months where I was just like, and I mean, to be really specific here and really honest, I started exploring like progressive Christianity. Do you know what I mean by that?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so I started to kind of go down the road of like, maybe the Bible's not really inerrant. Maybe there's a lot of wiggle room here about gender, sexuality, just relationships, because I'm like trying to do it like the historical Christian biblical way.
Yeah.
And I'm almost 40 and like it's still not working. And so I went through, again, maybe 6 months or so, I don't know that it was too long, of just like, frankly, I'm like, maybe this time I'll just kind of be my own God, because this hurts too much. Again, like it still hurt. I mean, it was 10 years later and it was still pretty painful. And I was really tired of hurting, to be honest. It's not like it hurt every day. There were many highs and lows. Life is highs and lows, as is our spiritual walk. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that one, I just remember kind of coming back to the Lord because of his grace. I don't know how else to describe it except that he held me. It's like there were times where I felt like I was trying to kick out of his hands and I wanted to run and he wouldn't let me go. There were times where the covenant relationship was like, and again, this is, I think, how I've learned grace along the way, is it's like, Rebecca, you've been rebellious towards me or not understood me, and I've never let you go. Like, I won't let you go, even when you're kicking and screaming. And that's more of what that time in my life felt like, just more of a like, oh my gosh, your love is relentless. Your love is relentless. And I missed him,
Yeah.
I missed the intimacy with him. And so then it re-dawned on me just how much he loved me. And yeah, I don't remember a specific moment that was like, oh, you are lovable. I mean, except that he would say that to me over and over. I mean, every time I would cry to him, every time I would journal, every time I would pray, every time I would open the word, it was the reminder that I haven't messed up on you. I haven't messed up on your life. You are lovable. I know your life doesn't look like everybody else's, but you just can't go there. You can't believe that lie. It will ruin you. And so I was like, okay.
When you look back on that season, what are you most thankful for with hindsight of a few years of the principles that God taught you at a new level that, yeah, few of us get to?
Um, I think I'm just thankful for alone time with the Lord. I mean, private worship, private prayer, crying, like the intimacy that we can truly have with God, because I would say anything to him. I like held nothing back. Um, I'm sure some people would be shocked at like how I would contend with God. And I've wondered sometimes if that was like, I can't think of a different word except brutish, because I think brutish is used in Psalms somewhere. Like I was
Yeah.
brutish towards you, I think is something David says at some point. And I remember being like that. And I'm sure there's some Christians that are like, oh my gosh, how could you talk to God like that? Or he would smite you or something. But I just didn't know any other way to process and to stay in relationship with him except to be like radically honest. And then you have to talk back to me, because if we're not being radically honest here, then what am I doing? Like, why am I in this relationship is kind of how it felt to me. So I don't
Yeah.
know if that answers your question. I just feel like the communion with God through the power of the Holy Spirit, through the power of prayer, saved me. I mean, the whole time it saved me.
Yep. It's, I got married at 21. She was 20. So we were
Yeah. You were
those
the people I was
typical,
jealous of when I was 20.
that's right. And I, the process when we're that young in our faith of that spouse, that plus one person,
Mhm.
uh, there isn't a validity, identity that could lead to that just comes naturally with being married young and
Yeah.
God providing the blessing of that. I
Yeah.
think the other side of that coin is it has slowed. It could with a lot of us who have been married. Like, what do we miss in that? I miss the intimacy of like
Mhm.
finding the depth of
Mhm.
uh, security, comfort
Mhm.
in God, because
Yeah.
our spouse will provide that sometimes. I
Totally.
yeah, there's beauty in what we have missed, and the potential for codependency, enmeshment, uh, taking some of that need and connection from what could be with
Mhm.
God that I hear you experiencing of intimacy, of raw relationship, and experiencing that with
Mhm.
our spouse, which is God's design. It's just different. One is not better.
Yeah.
They are different, and they have pros and cons. So
Yeah, they are.
how as a married so how as a married person our age who's been like, what's your hope for us when you come across like the normal, Christian who's been married for
Yeah.
forever? Like, what all do we miss that you hope for us to be extra aware of based on your journey?
That's a good question. And really that's, I mean, what I do now with women, whether I'm speaking or coaching, it's like I can see now why God's plan was what it was for me. I mean, over
Mm.
those 20 years almost of being single, because like I said, I got married a year and a half ago to a great Christian man, and I love being married, but I can look back now and realize exactly what you just said, which is that my singleness pushed me into an intimacy with God that I know a lot of people maybe don't get to, or it takes them longer to get to. And I'm like, I mean, there's nothing in my life that I'm more thankful for than that, even now, like nothing. And so now I get to speak from that place to women and kind of call them into that and let them know that's possible, and men, and in coaching and stuff, just like telling women this is almost like spiritual director. Like, this is how you do intimacy with God. This is how you talk to God. This is how you let God love you. I mean, a lot of women don't even know how to let God love them. And I'm like, okay, let me show you how, because I do know how now.
And men, Rebecca. I mean, speaking on
Yeah.
behalf of a friend, what are some things that you would want my friend to know about that relationship piece and that intimacy piece?
I mean, I think you have to be. like I said already, honest with God. I mean, I don't know why people hold back their real emotions with God. All day, every day, if you have questions of Him, if something doesn't make sense, if you have questions about yourself, if you're struggling with aging, if you're struggling with empty nesting, if you're struggling with singleness, if you don't understand something in the Bible, He's real, And it's like, it requires time, which is something that I had because I wasn't married and I didn't have kids. So I had hours, to sit with him, to take prayer drives, to journal, to commune with him in nature. And I don't think that people take the time.
Mm.
And so like knowing yourself well enough to know what's going on inside of you, spending that time with God is where the fulfillment of spirit, it's where the real interaction happens. It's not sitting in church, it's not doing like an intellectual Bible study, it's like the heart level, you know what I mean? And I think some people get that like once a year at a retreat, but because of the way my life was set up and all my time, I had it every day if I wanted it.
Yep.
So that would be my tip for people, or whatever, my like whatever you said. What advice? What did you say? What was the question?
Yeah. I think that is so such a good reminder, because it's kind of a chicken and egg deal of like, we don't know if we haven't experienced the value of like what's possible in like an honest, conversational, intimate relationship with God, which takes time and honesty and confession, which is just telling God the truth like we would our best friend or our spouse. If we don't spend that time, it's hard to realize the benefit of it. And if we don't realize the benefit of it, we don't prioritize that time. So even that encouragement to me this week of like, am I distracted, comfortable enough that I'm not prioritizing the time to have those raw conversations, which take time with God this week?
They do take time.
They do. And what I'm missing by not prioritizing that, I think for all of us, like there's nothing richer, nothing more significant.
Satisfying.
Yes, satisfying that we're longing for.
Nothing. And the things that He'll say back to us again in those moments, it's like, well, how do you know your identity? How are you confident in Christ? Because God Himself has whispered in my ear, I love you. You're enough. I'm with you. And it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, when you hear that from God Himself, it is empowering. It does make you feel good. I've told a lot of women over the years, it's okay to feel good about yourself. Like God does make me feel, and I don't mean that in a prideful way. I mean that in a like, God sees me. I'm here on purpose. God Himself communicates with me when I, need Him. He's there. That does make me feel good. It's okay to let that in, know. But again, you don't use that's not a second hand, like, oh, the preacher told me or something. That's like me and God.
I think about this a little bit of a turn. Well, I think about the grieving of like expectations we have of God, and like the low grade frameworks, equations, and expectations we have of God, if this, then that, that don't feel biblical, but they're so infused into our spirituality that it's hard to differentiate that. And I was watching The Chosen. It was like season 3, episode 2 or 3, where he was sending out the disciples in twos, and little John, who had a limp or something, came to Jesus, and he was like, hey, can you help me? Huh?
Why haven't you healed me?
Yes. And Jesus, it was just a masterful, it was so beautiful. Him going, I could, Rebecca, give you a husband at 22. And I could, I mean, that's in my purview, but man, the richness of my love for you and the plans I have for you of like the journey and do you trust me with that? I think all of us have that.
Yeah.
Financially, professionally, relationally. God, I did this. What about my kid? What about these things? So what has your process been of, because this isn't like this is a grieving
Yeah,
and
it's
it's
this.
bringing to God over and over.
Mhm, mhm.
What does that process look like as you've grieved being a wife, being a mom?
Yeah, like you said, it is kind of the shattering of a dream, an expectation. It's the shattering of how I thought my life would go. Um, and you're right. There was a long time where I felt kind of like I was the only person going through this, and nobody else suffers as much as me, which was a really ugly attitude because I've learned since then that, like you said, when maybe adults, children walk away from the Lord, or somebody, loses a spouse at a young age or has a health issue that kind of ruined, like almost everybody, I think, hits a point in their life where it's like, this is not how it was supposed to be.
Yep.
And how do we now reconcile that with God, a good God? And we've, how are you still good? Are you really still good? Um, And you're right. You nailed it. It was the grieving process itself was just over and over along the way. There were spiritual milestones, a few of which I told you guys about, but most of the time it was just a daily, weekly, monthly, this is still hard, this still hurts, and then he would infuse me with strength and truth and hope. And then, a month later I would have to kind of go there with him again. And
Mm.
then he would infuse me with strength and truth and hope and himself. And every time he did that, I think every time I had that like laying down of an idol and he gave me, it feels like my sort of space to contain him got bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's like, that's hard to explain, but it's like, I just kept getting more of him and more of him and more of him and more of him to the point that it's like, oh, you are better than everything else in the world. It's kind of how it felt.
Man.
Do you want
Yeah.
something more like give me some steps than that?
No, I think that is the essence of trust, unlocking love.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that trusting him
And that,
more builds that trust muscle.
yeah, and can I just say that that trust was there? I mean, there were very few times that I lost that trust, but I've always had a very deep conviction that, like, even though despite this whole struggle I'm explaining to you, I've had a very deep conviction that, like, God's ways are for me. They are for he's like a loving father, right? I probably knew that because my own father was, but it was like, even when none of this feels good, the reason I'm standing here contending with you is because you told me that it is good. And I'm going to believe that it's good. So you need to explain to me how this is good.
Mm.
If that makes sense. Like it didn't feel good. I saw ways that I could go make my own life good, but I was just kind of like, the way that I understand it or felt it over those years was, I'm like, I'm going to stand toe to toe with you because you told me that this was good. And so I need you to show me how it is. I need you to explain to me how it is. I'll lay down my idea that it had to be marriage and kids, but can you show me how
Yeah.
it's, good or for your glory? And he did every time, literally every time.
Man, like I think about my own life, the expectations and low grade equations that is an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity for me to trust him with,
Mm-hmm.
and replace fear and control with
Mm-hmm.
freedom and his light yoke. And that's a daily thing. Like even
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the past, like right now, I'm like, okay, God, what is it in my life that I'm uh, like I have these expectations of, and and what I don't trust. To what you said about just being honest with him, I think there's a couple in my life. Like I'm thinking right now about like, do I really trust his timeline? And can I trust that he will do cool stuff for kingdom work,
Mm-hmm.
despite me and my efforts and my timeline and expectations and
Right.
potentials? Like as we steward this ministry called Trueface, and on a personal level, I like there's fear lately because I've had some financial hits. The stuff comes in. It's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
it's anxiety because I don't know if I trust that he has what's best in store for me and my 8 kids and feeding them financially as stuff comes up. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh yeah, God, when was the last time I told you that out loud? Like even in my quiet times with him over the past
Mm-hmm.
couple weeks of just going, God, I don't know if you're thinking best in mind with this latest financial thing that makes no sense and it's just a loss.
Yeah, totally. It's
Yeah,
time to, it's time to.
well, I want to do that more frequently.
Hmm.
I want to verbalize my expectations
Hmm.
and tell him what I think he's missing in order to let him replace it with the truth, which leads to the
Right.
peace and the freedom that I'm looking for and I'm missing with those anxieties. And yeah, this is a timely encouragement.
Yeah, and
I think of one
that's
more thing, and then
okay.
no, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that um I want to encourage people if they're afraid maybe to approach God like that or on that level to remember that well, a lot of what's going on inside of you is not true, right? If
Hmm.
you're having thoughts, if you're having, idols or anger at God or even like sadness, it's important. Our emotions matter greatly, but some of what's going on inside of you is a lie. It's not true. And that's why we have to get it out, right? I mean, you have to get it out, throw it on paper or like throw it at the feet of Jesus so that he can give you the truth. I mean, we can't really sort that out unless we get it out. It doesn't just kind of fix itself in our brains. It lives in there and kind of pollutes us. And so for me, it's just this constant like blah to God so that God can give me back what is true.
Man, confession is truth telling. He can handle the truth.
Yeah.
He knows it, and
Yeah.
it's a catalyst for intimacy through prayer of just processing these truths with him.
Yeah.
Amen. I want to leave y'all with one random thing that I can't shake that I heard last week, and then as we wrap up this episode, Rebecca, I want you to close us out in a minute with whatever you want to leave this Trueface tribe with.
Yeah.
Uh, and but what I'm thinking of, I was at a conference last week and I heard Andy Crouch speak. He was speaking on technology and he was speaking about the Sabbath and how technology is derailing us from really resting and connecting with God and others. And so one practice is to not have technology on our Sabbath on Sunday. And he was talking about single people. And
Mm,
they said, yeah, but technology, my phone is my connection to the world
mm,
on Sunday. And
yeah.
so so you want my Sabbath to just like be sitting at home with no technology and to be lonely?
Mm,
And Andy Crouch said,
mm,
if there are single men and women
mm,
in our communities, our gatherings, our churches,
mhm,
shame on us if we are not doing life with them and fellowshipping with them on Sundays, on
mhm,
Sabbaths, on
mhm,
weekends, inviting them into our lives to
mhm,
model fellowship and love with a
mm,
sensitivity to
mhm.
people who are single. And that
Yeah.
it was a punch to the face.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what do you
Yeah.
hear in that?
I feel pretty strongly, having just walked through it all, that the church is doing a pretty bad job, the church as a whole, of honoring single people. Again, and that was one of the things that God had to speak my identity over me that whole time. Like, even if the
Yeah.
church isn't valuing you as a single person, like you are not less in the kingdom. Your purpose, your meaning is not less in the kingdom. It's not like it's more super spiritual to be a wife or to be a mother. Like, God had to keep telling me that part of my identity because, to be honest, the church wasn't. The church
God.
wasn't. In fact, every single Bible study and women's conference that I went to was all about your kids and your husband and submission. And I just stopped going because it only made stuff worse and harder for me. And so I think maybe what I'll leave people with is like, um, when God just steals every other voice, like you don't have a husband or a parent or even the church or friends speaking over you the things that we need to hear as humans, and it is important to have those things. I mean, I'm not saying we should live in isolation from those things, but when we can allow his still small voice to, sometimes it's the only one we get to hear. I mean, that's I think a gift from him. It's when we can finally wrestle with whether or not we believe what he says about us when nobody else is saying it to us. And so I don't know, what you're feeling in your life right now, or what, again, maybe it's aging. I know a lot of people are struggling with things like, I'm not the young or the beautiful person I used to be. And it's like, you're still worthy. You're still important. You're still God's.
Mm.
And let him tell you that over and over and over.
Well, Rebecca, this was super fun. And it feels like a teaser to talk about the church and singleness
Yeah.
and the theology of marriage and like our
Oh, I
perspective
got
of
some stuff to
marriage.
say about the church.
That that might be part two because I've been reading Corinthians recently in the mornings, and there's some strong teaching from
Yeah,
Paul about the
there
honor
is.
and the call and the
Mhm.
opportunity for single, which isn't talked about much. So maybe that's a teaser. This was a ton of fun, and I appreciate that last affirmation that now in my 40s with this gray hair and receding hairline,
Right.
he does still think I'm beautiful. So I receive that personally with my insecurities of looking old in my 40s and my
Yeah.
teammates telling me I need to dress younger on our videos because I'm
Yeah.
looking too old. So
Looking
I
cool.
received that. And y'all check out RebeccaAnnePerkins.com. Uh,
Mhm.
it is fun to meet, and make sure you share this podcast, give it 5 stars, check out her podcast. Thanks for being a part of the Trueface tribe, and we'll see you
Yeah.
next time.
Thank you so much.